Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ours All Activists. I am your moderator, Jamil Harp. I am a senior communications major. I am also the student activist intern for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm so excited to be here with you all. I have been a student activist on campus for a little over 4 years. This is my 5th year. So I have worked in residence life. I've worked for university access programs and a few other departments on campus. I have been a part of NAACP as president for a couple years. I also did Black Student Union. And I'm extremely happy to be meeting with you all and sharing some of my knowledge. So today we're talking about what is student activism. Some of you may be wondering, what is student activism? Essentially, student activism is, when you think about student activism, you think about movements throughout history. College students have always been at the forefront of social movements, whether that was the civil rights movement during the 60s, before and after. College students are there on the front lines, making change for the next generation. And so here at Southern, we are no different. We are doing that here. And student activism does not necessarily look like marching all the time or joining rallies. It comes up in many different ways. So tonight we have, thankfully, gratefully with us, 2 other brilliant student leaders. I will allow them to introduce themselves. So Lupita, can you please introduce yourself to the crowd?
Yeah, so I'm Lupita Barajas. I'm a senior. I'm an English major with a concentration in creative writing and a minor in film studies. I'm a part of student government on campus. I am currently serving as the vice president of Board of Academic Experience for that club. I'm also a tour guide on campus. And as for activism work, my activism comes out in my academics. So currently I am doing a thesis project. It's essentially going to be a graphic novel that will focus on white privilege in the Latinx community in the United States.
Nice. Mariah.
All right. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, I'm Mariah Villanova. I'm a senior here at Southern. I am also a public health major, minor in psychology. And my involvement on campus is I'm the undergrad intern for the Violence Prevention Victim Advocacy and Support Center here at Southern. I'm also on the START team, which is the support and resource team that provide collaborative victim-centered services on campus, as well as a part of the Caribbean Student Association. And as far as advocacy in these clubs, I basically do advocacy centered around victims of sexual assault, so providing services, resources of counseling, resources of conduct services, medical attention, off-campus resources, providing to students, as well as managing and incorporating campaigns like Red Flag campaign, as well as Take Back the Night. Also, we do education services where we go to classrooms and we educate on a number of things, identifying sexual misconduct, identifying sexual misconduct on campus, what that looks like, where to go, as well as any sort of opportunities for students to get involved and volunteer.
Nice. Thank you both for sharing. So, majority of my activism on campus, and which is weird for me to say, it's a new term I've been using to describe my experiences and sort of the impact that I and all of us have made on Southern's campus. Kind of how I started with this. I am a first generation student. So I'm first gen to attend college and first generation to graduate from high school within my family. Therefore, coming to college, I had to navigate a lot of my own experiences, which I'm sure some of you may relate to listening, right? That means I had to apply to schools myself, figure out my financial aid, how to register for classes, what dorms to live in, all these different things. And as I started to progress in my college experience, I started to find that there was ways in which my needs as a student wasn't being met. And I also realized that my needs were also the needs of a lot of my peers. And so one of the main ways that I found a sense of belonging on campus and a way to advocate, not just for myself, but for my peers, was to get involved on campus. I'm also a former SEOP student. So shout out to any SEOP students that are listening, with us today, hopefully. So shout out to them. So yeah, initially I joined Hall Council, which is a group in the residence halls. Basically, they do programming and they do social events. I started the communication club. So me and another group of students started doing that. Eventually, I joined the Student Government Association on campus, which is a huge voice for students. You're not just advocating for yourself. I'm sure Lupita can agree. You're advocating for the entire campus. Then afterwards, I became a peer mentor for university access programs. I started working for academics. I worked for Res Life. I was a senior RA for 2 years. And so that was a huge way of me to advocate for myself. So joining committees and planning events that I seen were missing, looking at student resources, especially around our food insecure students, our housing insecure students, seeing how I can help uplift those communities by using my voice and working on those issues to see where at SCSU we could expand resources. So that's some of the ways I have been able to commit to student activism in terms of my involvement. So do any of you want to talk about how student activism shows up in your involvement?
You want to go first, or?
You can go first.
Okay. I feel like, so I'm in public health, minor in psychology. And what public health kind of results around, looking at disease and illness and how that affects people, as well as health determinants, and looking at the different ways in somebody's circumstances affect their health, and looking at interventions on how to make these health disparities better in communities. So looking at primary prevention, which is where, looking at disease or injury before it occurs, and looking at those exposures and those hazards, as well as, I would say, interventions where we take those diagnoses and look at treatments and where to look for those resources for a treatment plan. So in my advocacy, I noticed that with working with VPAS, I've noticed that it's basically the same thing. We're teaching students primary education on how to avoid circumstances of sexual misconduct, as well as how to deal with becoming a victim to a survivor, and looking at treatment plans as far as services for counseling on campus, off-campus resources, health promotion, where people would usually go to communities and outreaches in public health on, let's say, smoking habits. I noticed that in my work, we've focused on supporting victims, as well as having tabling events to educate students on what sexual misconduct is, bystander intervention for students to be educated, as well as, understanding the word consent. And we noticed that in universities, within the first 2 weeks of school, students are reported to have experienced some sort of sexual assault or misconduct. Not always are they reported. So because we know that the number of students are experiencing these things, but are not always reporting, we want to make sure that we spread education and provide a safe community to our community here at Southern. So I've noticed that it all kind of connects, and everything that I've learned in class absolutely helps my work at VPAS. We work on social marketing aspects, as well as where we see health marketing campaigns. We also use, as well as in VPAS, where we're doing the red flag campaigns, where we're educating students on red flags in intimate partners, as well as their platonic relationships, and talking about what those red flags look like, how to even support your friend if you see someone going through those circumstances. And just basically a lot of education, a lot of incorporating support as well as understanding our community, being relevant and being sensitive to the circumstances certain students go through is so important. And I realized that it goes into my academics as well as my work here on campus.
Nice. So you also are part of the Peace Club. Do you want to talk a little bit about what is that? What do you do on that?
Sure. So I actually first started in Peace. So right now I'm the vice president, but it was actually one of their education presentations that I actually heard word of them. So I was in my public health promotion class, and a previous Peace member had come in, introduced themselves, talked about the work they do on campus. And I thought that it was something so amazing to me because I'm very passionate about the topic of sexual assault. And I'm aware that I felt like for me in the Hispanic community where there's not a lot of support, there's a lot of victimizations. And so I wanted to be a sort of representation for the school as far as being fluent in Spanish, having that opportunity to educate students, not only in English, but also in Spanish, and also just seeing my face, seeing somebody of color, I think helps in a sense of where you feel that, you can be able to come to someone like me to talk about where you can go for resources. I think it helps amazingly when it comes to connecting to students. So I started off with that. And basically what we do is we educate on sexual misconduct. We go through curriculums throughout the school. We visit different majors. We do, like, for example, for classes of women's studies, we would visit classrooms and educate on certain steps, what we do at BPOS, as well as how to volunteer. So those aspects, yeah.
Lupita, do you want to get into some of your work on SGA and some of the stuff you do?
Yeah, so I feel like the way that I was raised with the parents I have, I realized and I grew to find the importance of inclusion and just, it's a word I'm looking for, accessibility, making sure that things are accessible for students. So at least in terms of SGA, since I'm now vice president of the academic side of the student experience, I want to make sure that classroom spaces are accessible for students, whether that's in terms of like academic material, are we pushing for more social justice material being pushed into classrooms, or just making sure that the student voice overall is being heard by administration. So the most recent project that at least I can think of off the top of my head, last Tuesday, my board was able to meet with 3 of the STEM professors on campus, as well as the I hope I don't butcher her position, but she's a director. She works in the dean's office. She's a director for the STEM majors on campus. I know her name is Dr. Bennett. And pretty much we're just letting all those professors and administrators know what the students' concerns are in regards to the STEM classes on campus, how are students being affected by it, letting them know our concerns about how STEM classes are being run right now because of COVID-19 and all like those nuances that come with that. So that's just one of the small but many ways that we in student government do to advocate for the students, pretty much just being the voice for the students. I think that is the most simplified answer I can give about student government.
Nice. So there's actually a lovely question. I'll just read it really quickly. And I think it leads us into a direction in which we're trying to go. What examples can you share that Southern's commitment to student activism? So I have a beautiful example of this. I actually have 2. So currently I am the co-host of a university-sponsored podcast, Road Talk, Diversity in Higher Education. It has been extremely fun, first, I will say, to host this. We have a range of guests, and people may be wondering, how does that show Southern's commitment? So Southern has this podcast. It's a university-sponsored podcast where we talk about social justice. So the whole goal of this podcast is our university's commitment to uplifting student voices and to continuing to have dialogue about social justice. So we talk about many issues on the podcast. We talk about racial injustice, racial bias. We talk about people of color in STEM. We talk about faculty of color, student retention. There's so many topics we discuss. We have students on, we have our faculty on. And so that right there is one example of how Southern's commitment to student activism is being fulfilled. Also, some of you listening may have seen this in the news. Last semester, we had a Black Lives Matter march on campus. I and Cameron helped lead that march and organize that march, and we did have our university's full support when doing so. So SCSU did allow us to have that march. They supported us through that march with resources. So essentially, when we reached out to the vice presidents, when we reached out to our university and said, hey, look what's happening in the news. This is how we feel as students. This is where we want our university to stand on this issue in this moment. This is what we wanted to do. We were able to have that space. And I see there's a second question. Then I get back to that last question. How are Republicans treated there? That's a really good question. I'm glad you're asking this. Feel free to ask any of the questions on your mind. Republicans are treated well at Southern, as they are any other institution. We actually have a Republicans organization on campus where they meet and discuss politics. We have a Democrat association on campus. So there's a few different clubs and orgs that you can explore the politics side, if that's what you're interested in. And you can do activism from politics, right? We're a college university, so there's many spaces to do such a thing in. So that's well. Yeah, Republicans are treated well. But back to the Southern's commitment to student activism. Do any of y'all have any examples within your own experience you want to share?
I guess just to reiterate what you said, we have a whole social justice month dedicated to our school year where students and organizations can host whatever they want within that month that pertains to social justice. So that can either be, at least one of the bigger events that I attended in the past included social justice in environmental spaces, and just how can we be eco-friendly, or how does environmental justice relate to social justice, and just all the nuances and just the complications that comes with that. And I thought that was a really informative presentation. But yeah, just allowing students and organizations to host these type of events to educate other students who are not necessarily part of those clubs to learn about these different areas of social justice. I think that's probably one of the good things about Southern.
Absolutely. I think especially there, I know recently we've started this initiative now where it's Let's Thrive, where we're incorporating not only red flags that we wouldn't necessarily see, but also kind of looking at now the intentional action steps towards certain problems that you might be having on campus that, incorporate our counseling center, incorporates the Disability Resource Center, as well as VPOS and a few other departments where we see that students will definitely benefit from, as well as get a sort of support and resources. I know for me, during the Thrive initiative, we had to look at this whole way of trying to advocate for students in the aspects of virtually, remotely, and looking at that. So now a bunch of us are scheduling live streams. We're using a bunch of resources like Instagram, YouTube videos on how to help students. I know for me, I did the red flag, green flag campaign. So it was a lot of coming up with different aspects that can be relevant to the spaces now. I know for me, I created a series where it incorporated a Black artist, where he had these comic strips where they would talk about certain dialogues of healthy relationships, talking about toxic behaviors and intimate partners. And in my live streams, I talked about what that looks like, as well as, relating it to social media now, relating it to aspects of how to reach the students. How can they relate? How can I take this initiative and looking and trying to educate students on how to be love safer, as well as have a safe community here on campus that can relate to them on the everyday basis. And all these are, university funded. I'm able to have the access to materials where I can reach out to students on their phone, via email. Every week we have the Week of Owls, where we have a ton of workshops that deal with well-being as well as mental well-being. Covers a huge amount of topics. So definitely very committed.
We're getting some really solid questions. I love this question right here. How do we go about joining and becoming a student activist at Southern? I love that question. And I think, it's not like you do these particular things and then boom, you're a student activist. And the main purpose of this discussion is to show you that you can be an activist in many ways, right? It's not about just joining one club or doing one program on campus. You can be a student activist in a plethora of ways. You can do it by getting involved on campus in your clubs and organizations, right? We have a club fair in the beginning of the year where you can scope out the clubs that has your interest, whether that's Black Student Union, whether that's the Caribbean Student Association, whether that's OLA, the Latino Students Association. There's so many different things you can join. That's one way of doing it. You can get a student position on campus. You become an RA or OA, orientation ambassador, and start making changes in that position and bringing your diversity and your experiences to help students. You can do it through your academics, which I think we'll touch on next. So as a student, for 3 semesters, I did an independent study. So where I got a faculty to work with me on a special project. I did so in 3 different departments. I did it in my department, being communications, in partnership with the English department, and for the first time with the library. So using our wonderful librarians as research, almost assistants to help me on this project. The project I did was on intergenerational trauma within the Black American family, navigating through systems of oppression. So I was curious of how did systems of oppression throughout American history impacted families on a communication level, on a trauma level, and that's something I wanted to explore. And so that's one of the ways I was able to commit activism through my research and academics, by going to conferences and presenting on the information I found, going to conferences and learning more about the topic and meeting with researchers who are working with that in their fields. Another project I did in the communication field was around trans dignity in the workplace. So how was trans adults that were employees in the workplace, how are they being treated, and how would their identity impacting the work they were trying to do? That was some new research that my field didn't really have much information on. And so it was a way for me to expand upon that. And so being a student activist can look many ways. It could be an RA in the building. It could be a researcher who's quiet, typing away in the library, or it could be somebody outside with a blowhorn. So there's a lot of ways to do that. Lupita, I know you have a great example of your own that you may want to share.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, I'm currently working on a senior thesis, and essentially it's going to focus on white privilege within and its intersectionalities with the Latinx community in the United States. And I'm using personal memories from my childhood to talk about just all like the complications and of white privilege, especially being a white Latina like myself. And when I first started that project, I really did not consider myself to be an activist. I mean, like for me, activism was being outside with a blowhorn. Like that for me was activism. So when someone commented, I think like last semester, like, oh yeah, like you're doing so much activism work with your thesis. I'm like, whoa. No, that's not activism work. But I really had to sit with that label and really like just explore it and understand that activism isn't just one form of of activism. There's so many ways you can be an activist. So with this thesis, I'm hoping to examine white privilege within the Latinx community, and also examine the white privilege that's been very present in my life. And hopefully, if I succeed my defense in May, I would like to publish that, whether that's like self-publishing or getting that professionally published. But I definitely do want to expand and have this be known to everyone, not just have this project be something that's just at Southern. I would like the whole world, if possible, to know about it, and just, the complications of white privilege.
Nice. That sounds like a wonderful project, and I'm so excited to see what comes of that. Mariah, in terms of your public health major, especially in a pandemic like we are now, right? How do you mesh that with activism, like involving your career and meshing that with activism, all that meshed in with your academics? How does that look? How does that show up? Can you go a little deeper into that?
Yeah, so of course, public health, we're all like right now, a big topic is COVID, and how does that look safe, and how can we advocate in a safe way? So looking at what do we do to stay safe, but also come up with marches, protests, as well as safe ways. So I know right now for our Take Back the Night, it's this whole big campaign where it's we're having owls join together against sexual assault. So right now we came up with the idea of hybrid, where we would have a COVID regulated march to spread advocacy and support survivors of sexual assault, as well as having a pre-registered event online where students can come hear testimonies, as well as entertainment that supports and uplifts survivors, and giving that initiative for, basically giving students a kind of awareness of, the healing process, how that's different for everybody, and showing support, as well as with public health. I've noticed that it has been a lot harder to reach out to students. And it's so important to have these meetings with different departments, because we can kind of give each other like ideas of what to do and bouncing off of each other's ideas. And I'm finding out so much new stuff as far as technology wise on how to contact students, whether it's I'll Connect, where we have students have emails and it automatically goes to a student's calendar on their Outlook. So students can get notifications of events, as well as getting emails and being a part of social media to reach out to them. And I feel like remotely, it has been amazing way of reaching out to students, because, these are stressful times. We do have regulations as far as public health on how to be safe during these times. And I feel like thinking that having to go out in person is advocacy, but not realizing, presentations as well as remote meetings and events and programs are so helpful to advocating.
And we did get a question in, which I think relates directly to that, especially in terms of Take Back the Night, right? Mm-hmm. They asked, do you reach out to males too about sexual assault?
We do. So right now we're actually having an I Choose campaign, where it's an actual male initiative. We always like to incorporate that, sexual misconduct, as well as any sort of bullying or hazing, which we do support and provide advocacy at BPOS. We love to make sure that everybody knows that, this happens in any gender, any sexuality. And it's important to educate students on that. So even in our education classes, in our curriculums, where we have in each of our programs, we like to address the fact that, this does happen to male survivors. I'm working right now on research as far as how to talk about toxic masculinity and how that looks like for a male survivor who has been through any sort of sexual misconduct, and what that looks like as far as his determinants of seeking resources, their mental well-being, and how that can affect their schoolwork. And so I'm doing that research right now, and I think it's amazing. And I think it's definitely needed, especially in certain communities. Like, I can speak for myself in the Hispanic community, where there's a lot of victimizations, a lot of toxic masculinity, which silences victims of sexual assault who are males. And having these conversations not only makes someone believe that, you know, it's okay to find access for help, but also gives an opportunity to give them that effort to even talk about it.
Yeah. One of the reasons I love that question is because it brings into play intersectionality, right? It talks about a group in which in other spaces maybe don't feel like they have the support they need. And so you don't only have to be a part of VPAS to make a difference in terms of sexual assault, for instance, or misconduct or Title IX. So as my role as an RA, I was a senior RA for 2 years. And as an RA, I'm able to break stigma around sexual assault, right? Having those educational conversations with new students coming in about expectations, you know, resources, who you can go to. As an RA myself, I was a safe space that students can go to and be ensured they would get the help they needed. And so there's a lot of ways of doing that, especially even if you're not in a leadership role, being the person that is accountable and holds your friends accountable is extremely important. And I just wanted to throw that in there. There's other ways of being a mandated reporter or helping that topic. I love this question as well. What has helped you personally be a more effective activist? Lupita, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, definitely. I think reading a lot. I think as an English major, I'm always reading, but I definitely love to read more like theory and, you know, just different books on different aspects of activism or just different issues in general. So that would include like terminology or just like testimonies or just stories from the LGBT community. I read in my freshman year this memoir about this transgender student, and then his parent, and just like both of their relationship on how they managed like him coming out as transgender and how did she, you know, learn to accept that. I thought that was very helpful, and it also included a lot of terminology regarding the LGBT community. And more recently, because of the attacks against Asian Americans recently, both in Atlanta and just across the country, I've been reading more articles and just books and literature regarding the Asian American experience and just the Asian experience in general, just to educate myself more on that. But since I am Latina, I do tend to gravitate more towards just different types of like articles or just literature relating to Latinx experience, especially the Indigenous experience, as well as the Black Latinx experience, just because I'm visibly white. I feel like it'd be good for me to expand beyond that whiteness and just get to know more of the Latinx community that isn't oftentimes highlighted in a lot of spaces.
Nice. I would say for myself, quite frankly, it was having friends that were engaged in this work, especially in the beginning, right? Looking to older students that was living in my residence halls and seeing the programs they were doing, the jobs they were going for, the positions on campus, that allowed me to see myself in spaces in which I wouldn't have seen myself in otherwise. I think definitely an old saying, you know, the company you keep, that really helped my ability to be an activist. I would also say I was not timid in terms of advocating for myself. I knew there was things I needed from my faculty, right? There was things I needed from my university in order for me to graduate. So I needed to ask those questions. I needed to show up in certain spaces and be bold. And so for me, being bold has really worked well and really helped me become an effective activist. Also listening, right? Listening to what my peers were going through and seeing how I can be a support for them. Also, joining leadership positions extremely helped. Not only did it help me network with my peers, right? I met so many more students than I would have ever met not becoming an RA or not becoming a peer mentor for university access programs. I became connected to first-year students, second-year students in my class, older students, alumni. Not only did I get connected to students, but also people that work on campus, right? Like vice presidents, administration members, directors of other places. So when I had an issue, I knew who to call. I knew who were working in these departments. I felt comfortable with them. I already established a relationship with them. So that made my activism go a lot smoother. And also it happened with time. Like, it wasn't like I woke up and I was doing all these things. It slowly progressed where I didn't even notice it was progressing. And now looking back, I could see how all those steps fell into play. How about you, Mariah?
I would say for me, I would definitely have to be public speaking, as well as, like Lupita said, reading books and reading up on theories. And even in my work, testimonies of students. Mm-hmm. So I feel my first experience actually doing, like, I felt like real advocacy was when I went to Capitol Hill, and it was on the topic of budget cuts, where certain student workers were going to be fired because of certain cuts that were being made. And I was just working in my little student worker job at Bewley, dusting books and organizing books. And just by giving my testimony really helped me with my advocacy work. And I noticed later on that by doing that event and Southern even posting it, I was able to meet certain people. They liked what I say. They liked the perspective that I gave, as well as, like Jamil said, keeping the company that's around you. Having friends that were RAs, or even that I saw doing advocacy in certain departments and in certain clubs, definitely helped me get the opportunities to come out and have my voice be heard. Because, it literally just takes somebody telling you, do you want to do this with me? And going into a whole entire event, not even realizing how your voice can be so representative to other students on campus. And that even if some student had a problem and didn't say anything, you speaking up on a problem that somebody else might have is so important. And I think that it can sometimes look very hard to get in these positions, but I think that just putting that effort and putting in, just even going, because I started out just going to RHA meetings just because I knew that they were giving out food for free. Mm-hmm. And realizing just by doing that, I was getting involved, as well as joining the Caribbean Student Association dance team. I really love to dance, and I wanted to keep that going. And just by doing that, I realized that we do a lot of advocacy, support, showing representation into certain meetings and committees. Representing the Spanish, me personally, the Spanish community, but as well as other Caribbean countries. And by doing those things, I didn't realize how I was moving up, but I was. And I realized sooner or later I was a student leader, and I didn't even know it. So it's really that easy, and it's important to just take that first step to get involved, even if it's just a club that you're interested in.
So we have a really good question here. What kind of roles do you think future/current students can play in the type of work that your choice of organization does? What I would say to that, every year, every semester, we have new students joining Southern, right? Becoming a part of Southern's family. Therefore, the energy on Southern changes, the things we're doing changes. It changes with our student body. The things we were focusing on 4 years ago is a little different now, right? From when I was a freshman versus me as a senior, I have seen Southern progress and change its focus on things. And that is the power of student voices. First, I would say Southern will focus on whatever the majority of students want to focus on. I don't think students realize how powerful their voice is. And if you can take anything away from tonight's event, I would say take that away. When you come to Southern, know that you as a student, your voice, your experience, the things you're experiencing inside and outside the classroom, they matter. the things that matter to you and how you see yourself in retrospect to the rest of the world matters. So when you're at Southern and you join these organizations, it's going to be based around what you want it to look like. I'm not sure if any of you have done clubs and organizations in high school. It's a little different in college. I would say it's a lot more hands-on, right? Like you're running the budgets, you're running like your fundraising, like you're running meetings in minutes. Great leadership skills you're gaining, by the way. But you're also developing the programs you want to see. You're developing the topics of conversations you want to have. You're the one that's in charge of those things. So in terms of a clubs and organization side, it would be the students on that organization, which is deciding that. What do I think students, future students will be looking towards? I can't say, right? Like I'm leaving Southern, so it's not really up to me where students will be advocating for next. I would guess it's probably going to be around social justice, maybe anti-racist work, maybe on terms of more intersectionality. But quite frankly, who's to say? Who's to say? If anyone wants to add on to that, you know.
I think that is so true. As far as realizing you do have a voice. I primarily got involved with VPOS just because I wanted to see relevancy as far as in this department because of my own experience being a survivor of sexual assault and seeing that I can see certain things that can be changed around. And that just started off with me just volunteering and asking the right people, knowing who do you need to contact to that is in charge of these jobs that you feel like should do better on campus. And we're paying tuition at this school. Listen, I'm telling you, it may seem very intimidating because you're thinking, I'm a freshman, I'm just coming in, who am I? But you are the new voice. You are the new perspective. You are the new student that's going to give the university a run for its money. You have to let them know what it is that's not being represented for students and how that's affecting you, and letting them know that it's affecting other people, and having those conversations and having that sort of confidence goes a long way. But as far as future students, I don't know, but I would love to see what future students come up with as far as progressing the university, because there's always new things to evolve from, and it just makes a better community for our students.
Yeah. And I believe there was a question somewhere in here is how can being an activist be favorable to getting a job down the road? That is a beautiful question. So let's dive into that, right? Let's dive into that. So for me, being an activist, so post-college, right, post my undergrad experience, I do want to go to grad school relatively shortly. But outside of that, I want to work in higher education around diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So I came to Southern originally as a business major. I went to SCOP. I took my first comm class. SCOP, for those who don't know, is a 6-week program before the actual semester starts. So I was able to have that experience. I took a comm class. I changed my major to communications, but I didn't know what I was going to do with that degree. As I got involved, as I started advocating, I discovered a passion of mine. I have a passion for helping students, right? I have a passion for knocking down educational barriers and making sure college is accessible to as many students as possible, right? I know how education changed my life and how it can change the lives around me. And so I wanted to include as many people from my community in on this process as possible. And so for me, one, it helped me figure out what I want to do and find a clear path to doing so. Being an activist has been wonderful for me because it has led me to network with so many students, faculty, and administration members that can write me recommendations, right? That have worked with me, that can vouch for me, that says, you know, Jamil does good work. Also, it has helped directly lead me into the internship I am now, right? Which can lead to a plethora of opportunity afterwards. I go to conferences, professional conferences around this kind of work. I speak at events, so people are always seeing me speak, which is a really good in terms of my employability. So in terms of me getting a job, activism has been extremely helpful with my own professional, personal development, and also been something extremely satisfying along the way.
Right. I think it all jumps down to realizing that after giving back, you're getting back. And I notice a lot of ways of how doing what I do at VPAS and even being the Vice President of Peace and a SART member and having these positions where they've paid for professional conferences, like Jamil was saying, as well as preparing me to conduct my own campaigns, even coming up with my own curriculums on how to educate on different sort of crises, as well as topics that can show a lot of representation, as well as talking about certain health disparities, as well as even connecting those things to racism, as well as classism and different sort of health determinants. And I think that I didn't realize it until, right now I'm doing my internship, and we have internship classes that go with that. And kind of what we see as assignments are these reflective assignments when you realize that a lot of aspects, like even planning a program, learning how to conduct different ideas relatively to certain dynamics, like right now having to figure out during COVID how to reach out to students. That's a big thing because it shows that you can adapt in the workplace. And incorporating all this in my resumes, as well as qualifications that I've gotten from doing these jobs, extremely helps post-grad. So yeah.
Yep, I think I could go next. Since a lot of my work, both in academics and just in what I do in involvement, revolves around literally academics, I feel like I want to make it as accessible as possible. And since I am a student worker in the admissions office, I want to make it especially accessible to the Latinx community, especially those who will, to those applicants who are first generation college students like I was. Neither of my parents went to college, so being the oldest daughter and applying to colleges was a very scary experience. So anyway, it was a very scary experience. So I want to make sure that it's accessible as possible for those students. So at least for me, what I'm doing right now in the admissions office is just, being able to translate for parents who may not speak English very well, just to translate application material or just answer any questions that they may have, not just related to admissions, but just the college experience in general, because it is so much different than what many people imagine. So yeah, I definitely, to go back to the original question, just in terms of how can that be applied to just getting future jobs? I definitely want to continue working in higher education, maybe possibly around enrollment. So maybe admissions or financial aid, I don't know, something in that area. I definitely want to continue working in that, and just specifically maybe helping first generation college students, just because it is a very overwhelming journey.
Absolutely. And I think it's very important to, especially coming into Southern and doing these positions, to kind of jot down and always update your resume. We have career services here that are easily accessible, where you can make appointments and review resumes every semester, as well as being prepared for job interviews is so important. And we provide those services, as well as any club you're in and talking about the volunteer work you do, as well as the positions you get as a student worker. And, not realizing, like, for example, when I was working as a student worker in the library, I didn't realize that I was conducting projects as well as working with graphic design, as well as, having customer service where I would talk to students, take out books with them, give them certain advice as far as references. And it all applies. You just have to know how to word them. And that's why I love career services here at Southern, because they give you sort of the tools you need to know how to word that for future job experiences.
Yeah, and something that just came to my mind as you were talking, still related to jobs. I think that if you're applying for a job and they're very critical of the activism work that you've done, that I personally don't think that's a right job position for you, because a job should always be supporting you in everything that you do. And if they're critical about like you standing up for like injustice that you saw in like a classroom space or just anything that you've done related to social justice and just activism work, then I don't think that'd be a good place to continue to grow, because if they're not supporting you in these sort of roles that you're taking on or that you took on in the past, then it doesn't seem like they're going to continue to help you grow and expand your activism work. That's just in my opinion.
Absolutely. I think that's so important, that we don't realize that when we go into job interviews that they need us as well as we need them. And putting in that perspective of what you want out of the job is so important to talk about, and always negotiable as far as what they can give to you and what you deserve. And I completely agree. If you feel that a certain job doesn't necessarily have the representation of whether it's your community or as well as respect, it's so important that, you're there as a professional, as well as they have to conduct themselves as professionals as well, and giving you that sort of like I said, respect as far as the work that you've done. If not, then it's basically you should find somewhere else to go. Don't be afraid to put a stance on your identity and the work that you've done, because you are the only one that knows that the work that you've done and who it's helped and how much of an impact it's done.
Yeah, and there's another good question here. Can you provide examples of how faculty show their social justice activism in the classroom? So I don't know if you want to go into that.
So like I said, as far as peer educators advocating for empowerment on campus, we are a club that, students, faculty members, professors contact us and email us because they know that the work that we do. So they have us come in, whether or not it's relevant to the curriculum or not. It's a great way to incorporate respect in the classroom. So even us, VPOS coming in, or Peace coming into classrooms, talking about consent, talking about bystander interventions, because we know students go to parties. We understand that students go through these circumstances, and educating them on what to do, where to go. It has definitely been an access that professors have provided. And we a lot of people don't realize it, but a lot of our professors are on our START team. Like, I know a lot of faculty and staff, and basically our START team is a team that provides a collaborative amount of resources as far as victim-centered, whether it's counseling, medical attention, conduct services. There's a lot of staff members where they want to be a sort of access to students where they can find resources.
Yeah, and at least the activism work that I've seen and social justice work that I've seen from faculty, that at least the faculty that I have, is just making, and especially as an English major, making sure that the stories that we read, the authors that we read from, are all diverse. I mean, like, when we think of the English literature, we think of like these, like very just like old white men. And literature is just so much more than that. There's so many stories that dive into the queer experience, the Black experience, just so many different areas, and just including those authors, including those stories, just shows just how big literature is, and just how amazing it is. I mean, I'm getting very into it, but because I am an English major, but just including different types of authors and just a diverse set of authors, I think is very important. Yeah,
absolutely. You can definitely tell by a professor's syllabus on whether or not their importance of addressing social justice activism.
Definitely.
No. Yeah, and so I'm back. So I'm back.
You kept it rolling.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's the thing about tech. I wish this was in person so I can see you all and connect with you all. Mm-hmm. And so I say, let's just do one last question. I think we have time for one last question before we wrap up. If there is a student who wants to get involved in student activism, maybe shy, maybe nervous, doesn't know where to start, if you can give a piece of advice to the students listening, what would you give them?
I think putting yourself out there. I mean, you got to, and I give this advice to all students, really putting yourself out there, going to these club events. I think that's a really good way to start. Because I know that we've only mentioned like a small set of clubs that, at least that we're a part of, that does a lot of activism work, but we have over 100 clubs on campus. All those clubs do some sort of form of activism work, whether that's for mental health or for the LGBTQ plus community. Just there's so many clubs that focus on specific areas, and they all do just different work. So I mean, really getting involved on campus in terms of like clubs and organizations, I think is one of the best ways to get started on your activism work.
Absolutely. I think a big thing is finding your voice. And that goes into practicing talking to people and interacting with others. I feel like for future advocates at Southern, it's important to realize that even though maybe a club might necessarily do advocacy, you can always be the first to start something. I know that for when I started VPAS, I collaborated with the Caribbean Student Association, and we talked about intersexuality, or even incorporating Greek life as well. So it's a matter of, it's okay to start it, and it might be scary, but maybe it hasn't been there because someone hasn't voiced it, and being that person holds a lot of weight, as well as you meet a lot of great faculty, a lot of students. You even get a lot of great friendships from this. Friendships that will go on past college, that become colleagues now, people that you can work with future-wise. So I think a big thing is just taking that courage to come to even meetings and sitting there and hearing certain aspects and introducing yourself is so important, and it opens a lot of doors.
I would say you have to be resilient, is what I'm going to say. So college, there will be lots of things that will happen that will be unexpected, right? Maybe you fail a course. Maybe you have to work 2 jobs to stay in college while you're to pay for school. Maybe you will have a breakup at some point in time during your college experience. Life will happen to you. Life does not stop because you are in undergrad. It does not. College has many ups and downs. And so you be mindful as you are trying to advocate for others to also advocate for yourself first. That's first. Take care of yourself while you're a part of this process. Because you can't be a student activist if you're not a student. That's what I think a lot of students often forget. They get involved and they get ahead of themselves. I have done it in times where you forget to also be a student. So remember to be a student. And and to be resilient. Go with the ups, go with the downs, learn from your mistakes, learn from your successes, but really learn from your failures, right? There'll be times where you do a program, only 3 people will show up. You pitch your idea, the idea didn't go the way you want the idea to go. You know, there won't always be, every time you tried, there was major success. A lot of times you got to fail 10 times before you get that major success. So be resilient throughout your college experience. Have grit with you, stick in there and keep trying, because I promise you, even though you may have low moments at some periods of your college experience, that will not compare to the high moments you can have if you stick to it. So I will leave it there. Lupita, I believe you have something to announce.
Yeah, so, well, thank you guys so much for coming to this live panel. We're also doing more live panels again tomorrow and Thursday at 6:30 p.m. And as a reminder for all accepted students who are watching this panel, Accepted Students Day is on April 10th. That's on a Saturday. And it's an all-day event hosted by the admissions office as well as other offices on campus. And if you are able to attend, I definitely recommend you guys going so that way you guys can meet other current students on campus and just ask them questions about, you know, just the student experience, meet with some professors in your academic area just to get some perspective of what you're interested in. Yeah, I highly recommend coming to Accepted Students Day on April 10th.
Absolutely, I do too. I love my acceptance day. Definitely met a lot of great staff.
Yes. Me and Mariah met during orientation, so you will meet plenty of people during these first times, and some of these people you will meet will be lifelong friends. Also, some other upcoming things. You can listen to the podcast I co-host if you want to hear from other students talking about student activists, talking about some of the hot topics on campus. You can hear our podcast, Real Talk, Diversity in Higher Education. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website. You can also see upcoming programs if you're curious to see what programs are happening at Southern on our events portal, on our website. You can also see community events on
I thought it was me for a second.
Facebook. So if you're interested, so you can fill it out, see what's happening. Yeah, my cat's behind me somewhere. So thank you all for joining. I hope you have a successful journey here at SCSU. And if you do make it here and you see me on campus for whatever reason, please give me a hi.
Yes, me as well.
Thank you to my panelists. Thank you both for coming.
Yeah, no
This
problem.
No problem.
Thank you so much. We hope to see you guys.